Hello everyone, we're here again to look at another topic in science. Actually, this is a continuation of adaptation. If you recall, we've already looked at adaptation in a broad sense. We talked about adaptation of the tilapia fish. We also looked at adaptation of the African bullfrog, the African bull toad. So now we want to proceed on to look at the reptiles. We'll also look at mammals, and we'll briefly describe water plants and how they are adapted. Welcome back to my class. My name is Mr. Quresh. So here are pictures of some reptiles: the tortoise, a snake, this must be a lizard, and the crocodile. These are all reptiles, and the class they belong to, we describe it as Reptilia. So you have to be comfortable with the class for each of these organisms. Remember the fish. I hope you recall that the fish belongs to the class Pisces, but in case you can't remember Pisces, simply say class fish. The toad belongs to the class Amphibia. And now we're looking at the Reptilia, that's the class. Don't get confused with the names, like you would hear people describing or calling them reptiles. Yeah, that's not the class, that's the name for them. They are reptiles. But if you want to name the class, you have to say Reptilia. The same thing for Amphibia. Amphibians are there, but the class the amphibians belong to is called Amphibia. So let's move on. We will be describing more of the adaptation of a gamma lizard or the rainbow lizard. It's very common around our dwellings. You easily find them on hills, walls, you find them on trees, especially in the morning hours when it is very cold. So they are trying to get heat from the sun. Animals that are adapted to a terrestrial environment must have the following traits or characteristics. One of them is that they must have a moist membrane for gas exchange. This is not so much the case for animals that live in water, because they are surrounded by water, and water, of course, is in abundance. But those that moved out of the water, and that includes some amphibians, and of course now the reptile we are talking about, and all the other organisms we are going to meet, that includes the birds and the mammals, they have this problem. So because they are out of water, they need a water environment, a moist environment for exchange of gas. Number two, they must be able to support the body for locomotion to take place on a suitable land. Now, if they don't have the proper support and they are not able to move around on land, it will be difficult for them to, one, go after prey or something, search for something to eat, and it's also going to be difficult for them to escape predators. So number three, they must have a means of conserving body water. This is one of their biggest problems, animals that live on land, because on land there is a lot of evaporation taking place. So if they don't try some means of conserving or keeping this water, they will suffer what we describe as desiccation. They're going to lose a lot of water, and without the water, certain body functions will not take place. Number four, they must have a means of reproducing and providing for early embryonic development out of water. Now this is very important. You will see when we looked at the lower classes of the animals, the fish, they were in water. So what do? They simply produce the eggs, and they are fertilized in water, and they find the amphibians must return to water, because water is very important. Now those that have gained independence from the water must ensure that they are able to provide enough water for the embryo as it is developing. So this is why most cases the embryo develops inside the body, enveloped or enclosed in a body of water. And lastly, they must have a means of surviving in rapid and extreme climatic changes. There are situations wherein the climate can be very, very cold, and others they have extremes of heat. So land animals have problems dealing with these extreme changes of climatic conditions. So they adapt themselves so that they'll be able to survive all these conditions. So let us look at the general characteristics of the reptiles. Now you have examples there: the lizard, the snake, the tortoise, the tortoise, and they all belong to this class, Reptilia. And we already mentioned they are vertebrates. So they are able to live on land, and there are some that live in or near water. They reproduce by laying eggs, and therefore fertilization is also internal. We've explained that in the previous lessons. Internal fertilization meaning the eggs are fertilized inside the body of the organism. Certain things that are unique to them is that the body is covered with scales. But again, when you look at fish, the body is covered with scales. When you go to the birds, the legs of the birds are also covered with scales. And for the reptiles too, the entire body is covered with scales. This is very important because it helps in preventing them losing water. They possess 2 pairs of limbs for movement. That's very important too, because like we said, you must have means, or you must have the means to move about on land. And having limbs enable them to move quickly, so that you're able to search for food, search for mate, and also you're able to escape predators. Having lungs has enabled reptiles to be able to live on land, because lungs are able to extract oxygen from the air, unlike those that live in the water that use gills, like the fish, because they are adapted for extracting oxygen from the water. So reptiles, they breathe by means of lungs, and they possess eardrums, which is responsible for detecting sound vibration. It's very important that you know what is happening in your surrounding. If you can't, enemies or predators will come very close, and then you could be captured and eaten. So they have a highly developed eardrum that is able to detect even the slightest vibrations. You may have noticed, you'll see a lizard hanging about somewhere, but when you're moving, the footsteps are making vibrations that reach the eardrum, and it is able to process them. It's aware you're coming, and then it doesn't hang around waiting for you to come and capture it. And finally, we said the reptiles are poikilothermic, which we said means they are unable to maintain a constant body temperature. So again, just to recall your memory on these terms: poikilothermic, homeothermic, and remember we also mentioned ectoderm, and we mentioned endoderm. So briefly, as a summary, ectoderm means they gain heat from the surrounding. Endoderm, they generate the heat by chemical reactions in the body. Now, poikilothermic means they are unable to maintain a constant body temperature. And all organisms need a certain body temperature, preferably a warm temperature. So, but for reptiles, they are not able to keep that. So they must always be moving about where there is heat. If it is cold, they look for a source of heat. Like I mentioned earlier, early in the morning, you will see them out in the sun. We describe that as basking. So they will lie on rocks, because the rocks easily become warm. They gain heat from the warmth coming from the rock, and also the heat that is coming from the sun. But again, like we said, they cannot keep a constant body temperature. So as the temperature increases, they'll have to move away from the heat of the sun and the hot rocks. They now look for shade so that they can bring the temperature down to what their body can accommodate. And more on that, they have developed amniotic egg. That means the egg is enveloped inside a membrane, a tough membrane, which serves to provide nourishment for this baby, and also to protect the young, the embryo of the reptile there. Now, having amniotic egg is a special adaptation for terrestrial organisms, because this is where water is enclosed and trapped, and the baby or the embryo develops inside this water environment, which is imitating the water conditions that their colleagues like the fish and even the amphibians, they enjoy. So animals that live on land must have an amniotic membrane around their egg. So we say they have amniotic egg. It's an adaptation to terrestrial life that results in a waterproof, in this case, leathery egg shell. We already alluded to basking. It's a behavioral adaptation. What we mean by behavior, it means the organism is doing something. This is not the same as the structural adaptation. Structural adaptation is having body parts or producing body parts or changing body parts so that they are able to survive in some conditions. But for behavioral adaptation, the organism does something. A simple example is, if I'm to feel hot, I'll start fanning myself, or you use a book or some other thing that is flat so that you can fan yourself, or you move to some areas where it is much colder so that you can feel a comfortable, lower temperature. So basking is a behavioral adaptation of ectoderms. Remember, ectoderms, organisms that are not able to make their own heat. They have to get the heat from their surrounding. So by basking in the sun, they increase their body temperature. It simply involves moving to locations where more heat energy, such as the one from the sun or warm rock, is available for absorption, and they also hide to regulate or control the temperature on the shades. If the temperature becomes very high, they move away from the sun, they move away from the rocks, they go on the shades so that they can cool down. But if it is cold, they look for warm rocks, and if the sun is out, they also lie under the sun or position themselves so they can be receiving heat from the sun. They can be oviparous, ovoviviparous, and viviparous, depending on the species. We tried to explain this before. Oviparous means they lay egg. Viviparous, they don't lay egg. The young develops inside the mother, and then it is delivered alive. And the ovoviviparous is a combination of the two. Now, eggs are laid. Now, these eggs are either remain inside the mother's body, or they are taken up into the mother. And in some organisms, even fathers contribute in taking the eggs and then keeping them there so that the embryo will develop. So once again, oviparous, those lay egg. Viviparous, they give birth to young ones alive. Ovoviviparous, the eggs are nourished inside the body of the mother, or it could be father in some instances, and when they hatch, then they are coming out. This group of organisms, some have a heart that is having 3 chambers. Remember, the chamber is how many spaces or how many holes or rooms that you have inside the heart. So there are some that have 3, but some have developed to have 4-chambered heart. Now, the more chambers you have, the more efficient the heart is in doing its work, which is to supply blood around the body and then collect this blood back. As the blood is going with nutrients and oxygen, and coming back, it's collecting all the waste, and that will now be redirected to other body parts or organs that specialize in taking out this waste. Now, they concentrate their waste, all this nitrogenous waste, they concentrate them into a paste-like material. Usually, the feces of the lizards, you'll see some portion is white, that is the nitrogenous waste, and some portion is black, that is actually the feces. So they combine the feces and the nitrogenous waste. And why are they trying to do that? Because water is a problem. Okay, for those organisms, water is not readily available, so they must try to conserve water. And how do they do this? By making sure every little water that is available is kept. So the waste that is coming out is a highly concentrated paste-like rather than passing out urine and so on. That also contains uric acid, a whitish liquid, something that is a mixture of nitrogen waste. Some, like the snakes and the lizard, they change their skin. Okay, so for them to grow, they must shed their skin at certain intervals, and then they can grow with new skin. And when they reach a certain stage also, they shed the skin again. So that is some of the characteristics that we can use to describe reptiles. Now, we want to look at adaptation, more of it, for terrestrial life. We say here one of the main hazards of life on the land is the fact that there is a tendency to lose water by evaporation. So when that happens, it leads to desiccation. Desiccation means the cells of the body lack water, and without water, they are not going to function properly. So the dry skin of the reptile with the epidermis are thickened to form scaly plates, and that reduces the evaporation of water to a minimum. Simply put, it reduces loss of water. The scales also protect the body from mechanical injury. So if you look at them, you can see the scales are actually tough, so that as they are moving, climbing walls or trees, you'd be thinking that the body will be scratching and so on. But then the scales are actually there to protect them. The presence of a shell around the egg has enabled reptiles to become less dependent on water. So you can see this one laying eggs, and again, now the shell, the leathery shell around the egg has ensured that there is abundant water for the developing embryo. But for that water not to be lost, the lizard will have to dig a hole and leave the eggs there. And usually they look for soil that is moist, that contains small amount of water, so that when they lay the eggs will be absorbing moisture rather than losing moisture. So sometimes you might face a diagram in exams, and they require you to be able to label the parts. With the larger organisms, labeling them should not really be much of a problem, because we're familiar with a lot of their body parts. They are much similar to our own body parts. We can see the lizard has clearly a head and a neck and a trunk. So the head stops somewhere here, and the neck is actually not a long something. It's just a very short, joint between the head and the body. And then the rest is actually the trunk. The tail is actually part of the trunk. So then you come to things like the eardrum. They don't have the external ear or pinna, so they have an eardrum. And they have the eyes that are actually described as bulging, they're standing out. That helps them so that they will be able to see, and observe the environment. They're always on the lookout for two things, either prey or predator. So you must have very good eyes. And some reptiles, the eyes can work independent of the other, especially if you come to this, the chameleon, for example. it can rotate or it can move, for example, the right eye front or back or up or down, while the left might be pointing somewhere. So that increases their vision, the area they can see. And they have, again, this nictitating membrane that will help to prevent loss of water and dust damaging the eye. Okay, they have a nostril that serves the same purpose as in us, for smelling and for breathing, so that gas can go in and then they breathe, of course, by means of the lungs. Now, they have this fold of skin here. It's called the Gullah Fold. It's important, especially in the males, for courtship. That means when they want to attract the females, they make this thing to grow large, but also as a means of defense. If they are threatened by some predator that wants to eat them, they will make this thing grow so their heads will look like they're very big, and the organism might think, I will not be able to swallow this one. And also when they are engaged in fighting, especially male to male, they increase that so that, again, it will give the appearance of a very large animal, and the other lizard might, be, made to be afraid and might want to run away. So the bigger you are able to make the Gullah Fold, the better for you. The nuchal crest also has a similar function. It's something like, a layer of tissue that is right on top of the neck. Again, these things are more, standing out among the males. Again, it's very important for courtship. Those that have a very, large or beautiful one, the better they are able to attract a mate. All right, we know there are scales all over the skin. Okay, the whole body is covered with overlapping scales. We mentioned that. It helps to prevent mechanical injury. It also helps to prevent water loss. The tail helps them when they are moving. It helps them to maintain balance. And in some instances, when they engage in fights, they can use the tail to, whip the other. And the tail also helps to protect them, because, like, if they are caught by the tail, some prey or something, wants to hold them and catches the tail, what they do is they have a way or a mechanism of breaking the tail, and they will leave the tail piece with you, and then the rest of the body will survive. They will regrow the tail a little bit, but it cannot be as long as it was in the original. We mentioned the cloaca, which is located slightly behind the hind leg. As I'd mentioned before, the cloaca is just one opening wherein gametes pass for reproduction, feces and urine also pass through the same opening. And so we have the limbs. They have 5 digits, which are so designed that at the end of the digit, you have claws. These claws are very important for grabbing rough walls and trees so they can climb. If the walls or trees are smooth, they will not be able to climb them. And of course, it's also useful for digging the soil, especially for the females, so that they can dig the soil and lay their eggs there. So basically, make it a practice to draw or make drawings of the lizard. At this level, they will always draw the diagrams for you, and they ask you to label the parts. So, but if you engage yourself in drawing the diagram and labeling it, if something like this comes in an exam, it becomes easier for you because you already know the different parts. So make it a habit to practice it several times. So we're looking at the two, the male and the female, okay? You can see here the male is longer than the female and often twice as heavy as the female. Young males that are not yet in possession of what is called a territory, they are indistinguishable by their color from the females. When they are young, both males and females look alike. But once a male comes into maturity and is able to claim a territory, then it's able to camouflage or change its color so that it can look beautiful. And of course, they grow even more bigger. Now, what is this territory? It's an area you must be able to defend. And once you're able to defend the area by fighting off other males, now the females that come around your area, you are the owner for that area, and of course every female that is there, so it means you can reproduce with them. And sometimes some males will lose a territory to a stronger male, and others will stand their ground and fight off an intruding, competitor. So once you are in your territory, you're the master or the head of that territory. But sometimes, even among the young ones that are there, they can sometimes challenge the adult male, and if they succeed in driving the male away, then they can own that territory. So the mature male, we say, has an orange head and a brown, blue, or black body. The middle section of the tail is also orange, but ends in a black tip. The female is less brightly colored. She has a brown head with green markings, a fawn body, okay, the color, and with brown patches down the back and yellow markings on the flanks. So usually the females are less colored. The males, they are much more colored. Of course, like I mentioned, the essence of that is to gain attraction from the females. Now, we're going to talk about one or two more life activities. Locomotion. Lizards such as the agama can run very rapidly, but only for short distance. And sometimes you might encounter questions like, why is it that the agama can only run for a short distance and then you stop? You might have seen them. They run a little bit and then they'll stop, but they can run very fast, very fast. But why is that so? Now, if you look at the body, you can see the legs are sticking out from the sides. All right, they are not under them like when you look at the cow or the goat, wherein the legs are supporting them directly. The legs are under. But if you look at the agama lizard, or any other lizard for that matter, the legs are sticking out from the sides. So it's for them to move, compare it with you trying to do a press-up, and in that position you're moving. You will move, but it's going to be difficult. So that's how difficult it is for the lizard. Well, not exactly, because they've been able to adapt themselves to that. So this is why they're able to move faster if there is danger, particularly, or if they see a prey, they can chase it. Right. So they climb vertical surfaces with the aid of the claws on their 5 toes. And while they are at rest, because the limbs don't support them, they will lie on the stomach. But when they want to move, they have to lift their body like somebody doing a press-up, and then they can move. Feeding is very interesting. Like the amphibians, the toad, they have this tongue that is sticky at the end, glue-like saliva. So it only needs to touch the prey. And most instances, the prey are insects, ants, there's grasshoppers, crickets, and worms. They feed on all those things. So they simply just touch, and it sticks on the tongue. And then you can see in the bigger picture, they now bring the food into the mouth. The teeth they have is not for chewing. It's one, to prevent the insect from escaping once it's been caught, and number two, to be able to grab, to hold the prey, and then they can use swallowing mechanisms to swallow the food. Like in the toad, for the lizard, the tongue is the lower jaw. That's where the tongue is attached. So that's how they capture their food and they feed on them. Reproduction is much more, at a higher level. They reproduce by laying eggs, which have large yolks and tough outer membrane. Now, the yolk is actually a reserve of food, and it is that the organism is going to be feeding on as it is developing. We already mentioned fertilization is internal. It means the male has to deposit its sperm into the female's body, and that will reach the eggs. Of course, they use the cloaca, like I mentioned. Both the male and female will bring their cloacas together, and then semen from the male is passed to the female, and the eggs are fertilized. Now, once the eggs are fertilized, the female digs a hole and lays the egg. As I mentioned before, they dig a moist hole in a moist soil, leave the eggs there. After a certain time, the young one will hatch, will break open the egg, and then they come out. So breeding season is very interesting and very important because it has to be done only when the soil is sufficiently moist for the eggs to survive without desiccation. So they are so designed that you'll only, see them breeding when the soil is going to be moist or is already moist. And then, so you'll see that reproduction occurs more, or mating occurs more in the wet season. Or for those that live, near water or moist areas, then they can reproduce at any other time. But those that live where there is water is limited to only a certain or specific period, then they must reproduce only when the soil is sufficiently moist for the eggs to survive without desiccation. So egg laying is the responsibility of the female. The female scrapes a hole about 5 centimeters deep in a damp soil using her front leaves and lays 6 to 7. It could be more, it could be less, but that's about the average, and then cover it, and that's all they have to do. There's no other parental care like you might see in some other organisms. So once the eggs are laid, they finish the assignment. The eggs will hatch on their own, and the young ones that come out now have to, live on their own, find food, protect themselves, and that makes their life interesting. But there are some other reptiles like the crocodiles. They actually, some of them show parental care. When the eggs hatch, in fact, when they lay the eggs, they stay around them, near them, to protect them. Although the mechanism is the same, they will all dig soil or look for some where it is very damp and moist. When they make a nest, lay the eggs and cover them with leaves that are about to rotten, so that they provide more moisture. And when the eggs hatch, they help to take these young ones into water. Alligator particularly has been observed doing that. So the eggs are about 1 centimeter long. You can imagine 1 centimeter, a very short distance. And they're covered with pale leathery shell. They absorb water from the soil. This is why they must be laid in soils that are moist, and they swell to 4 times their original size. So using the yolk as food, the embryo develops to a young lizard about 11 centimeters long in 6 to 7 weeks. So imagine from being 1 centimeter, the young one that comes out is about 11 centimeters in length. So how do they do hatching? A special sharp egg tooth on the snout, the tip of the nose, enables the lizard to cut through the eggshell and emerge or come out. So we move on to the next class, which is the class Aves. Again, if you can't remember the correct name of the class, it's okay to describe them as birds. But in a strict situation wherein in an exam you're asked to state the class of the organism, it is very important to remember this name, okay? So taking you back, fish, the class is Pisces. For the birds, the class is Aves. And for the lizard, it's Reptilia. And later we'll be looking at Mammalia, okay? So this has way too many labelings, okay? So perhaps we just need to look at few of them. Like here we have the beak, okay, which is a modification of the mouth. The mouth has been modified to form a beak, which is described as being honey, a little bit hard. In fact, not a little bit, it's really hard, so that you've seen some birds that are able to, peck into wood or make a hole or nest into wood. The eyes, if you've been looking at a chicken, you should be able to see pretty much the similar things. They have the eye, and they have eyelids that will help to protect the eye. We know the body is covered with feathers. When you come to the legs, they have there's scales that are protecting the leg. Okay, and birds also have a tail, which is very useful, especially if they are moving, when they're flying. It helps to maintain balance. So you don't have to label learn all these things, but essential things like a head, they have a short neck, and then the body, they have the legs, and note that the legs also end, the feet rather, end in digits, and the digit also end in sharp claws, which are very useful when they are, grabbing trees, climbing, and so on, or holding on to some materials like, ropes, and so on. So the general characteristics of the birds, the class is the aves, or the aves. They live on land and in trees, okay? Those on land you describe as terrestrial, and those that live on trees or in trees, we describe them as arboreal. And then some of them spend much time in water, like the ducks, okay? You find the ducks staying a lot of the time in water. We already mentioned about amniotic eggs. It means the egg itself is surrounded by a tough membrane that is called the amniotic sac that holds water in which the embryo lives and it is going to grow. But for birds, it is calcareous. That means it is hard because of the calcium that is there, okay? So they have amniotic eggs with calcareous hard shells. Of course, all these other organisms we are going to look at, fertilization is internal. We've already described that. And their bodies are covered with feathers and the scales on the feet. Okay, we've touched on that. They possess a pair of wings and a pair of limbs for movement. So they are very interesting because the fish, the toad, the lizard, and the bird, and of course the mammals, we all have 4 limbs or 2 pairs of limbs. And the top ones, we describe them as the pectoral, and the bottom one, we describe them as pelvic. So for the birds, the pectoral limbs are the ones that have been modified or adopted to become wings. And then, of course, for breathing, all these higher animals use lungs and a well-developed eardrum, which detects sound vibrations. And again, they are homeothermic, which means they are these are able to maintain a constant body temperature. And they are so-called warm-blooded. Warm-blooded in the sense their blood is warm all the time. So yes, it's okay to say homeothermic organisms are warm-blooded because they are able to keep their blood warm all the time. But it is wrong to say poikilothermic organisms are cold-blooded because you are implying their blood is cold all the time, which is not true, because sometimes, especially after basking, their blood is much more warmer than even the homeothermic organisms. So they also have a 4-chambered heart. I already mentioned that if your heart is made up of 4 chambers, it is very efficient in doing its work of supplying blood all around the body. They are oviparous, all of them, so it means they all lay eggs. They possess the cloaca, I already mentioned. It's one opening for gametes, feces, and for urine. Again, like the toads, like the lizards, their nitrogenous waste is concentrated into a paste-like material for water conservation so that they don't lose water easily. Their mouths are modified into beak, a hard material to help them either in capturing prey or in digging holes in trees and other stuffs like that. And they also have claws that are modified for specific activity. You have different kinds of birds, and they each have a different activity they engage in terms of capturing prey or protecting or defending themselves. Their digestive system is a little bit more advanced, and it is modified for diet. It includes a crop and gizzard. Now, the crop is some structure a little just after the esophagus, or it's even part of the esophagus that is modified into something like a bag. So it is used to just store the food. The organism will just be eating food randomly, and the food will be stored there because it's sort of sense that it's not going to be free to be moving around and having food all the time. So as it is feeding, it's keeping the food there. And then the gizzard is another part of the digestive system. It's also like a bag, but this has tough tissue or muscles. And there's sometimes you find a lot of grains of sand or sand in it. They help to break, especially grains like rice and so on. It helps to grind and break them into pieces before the body can now continue digesting. Don't forget, there is a funny question we ask you. How many teeth does a bird has? You have to know birds don't have teeth, they only have beaks. So because it's only the beak, they cannot chew food, they only swallow. So if they swallow things like rice and other grains, they need the gizzard to help break them into absorbable portions. Now, they are the only organisms with feathers, and we're trying to say the feathers are actually modified scales. The scales of the fish, the scales of the reptile have been modified or changed in the birds to form feathers. And they are very important for flight so that the birds can fly. And they also help in insulation, keep the bird warm. Another adaptation is the fact that they have hollow bones. The bones have a huge amount of space between them. That makes them lightweight. And because they are light, they're easier to be carried when the bird is flying. Animals that don't fly, like us, our bones are not hollow, right? You have tissues in the bone, in the center of the bone, and all of that adds to the weight, and that makes it difficult even to jump. The front limbs are the ones that are modified into wings, and also some birds, they have what is called air sac. Now remember, we met the air sac or the swim bladder in the fish. Now the birds, because they have to fly, they actually have in air sacs that helps to keep them buoyant, so that it also helps to aid them in breathing, like they keep extra air in there, because the higher you go, the less the oxygen you meet there. So if there's some that fly to very high heights or altitudes, they struggle to get air for breathing. They don't get all the air they need. So the air that is reserved in the air sac help to provide the extra amount of oxygen they need. So locomotion, of course, is by using the wings so that they can fly. But of course, some of them can walk. Some can walk and fly. Others, they can only walk and they can't fly. They may just jump, few meters. Especially they can jump from trees and come down, or they may be able to jump up to trees, but that's all they can do. They can't fly long distance. But others that are, designed for flying, they can fly long distances. And we say they also have strong claws. If you look closely, you can see they're using the claws to be able to climb up trees. So feathers, like we mentioned before, they have two primary functions. One is they form an insulating layer which helps prevent heat loss. It's very, very important. And that helps them to maintain that constant body temperature, which makes them homeothermic. They also provide structural surfaces that enable the birds to fly. So here is a diagram of a feather. Think of it like a leaf. You have the main, structure inside, that is referred to as the rachis. And it says also inside this rachis here, it's a little bit hollow, which means there's a bit of space inside. All of that helping to make the feather very, very light. And if you take a feather and you drop it, you'll see the way it will, be moving before it reaches the ground because of the light weight. Its density is very small, so it can stay up much longer. So this whole piece here is referred to as the vein. Okay, and there you have some little brushes that are referred to as the after feather. But when you look closer, okay, so this thing, the rachis or the shaft, and now you come to this one, the vein itself. Now the vein, the way it is designed, we're trying to expose that here. So it's like you have pieces of the tissue there that are interlocked or making a network, and so you have each of these that is running is the barb, and then you have the tiny little brushes that are interwoven to form the barbules. Now that design helps to make the feather airproof so that it's able to resist air passing through the feather. So that way it's able to push down on air, and that is what the birds use when they want to fly. I'm not sure, but just in case you face questions on this, so you try to remember this is the shaft or the rachis. The sides of the thing that are attached to the rachis is the vein. The vein itself is made up of barbs, and the barbs are made up of tiny strips that we call the barbules. We're also required to look at the types of feathers. Every bird is having at least the 4 basic types. You have the wing feathers, and you have the tail feathers. The tail feathers and the wing feathers are very close in terms of their structure, or similar in terms of their structure. But then the down feathers are the ones that are very important for insulation, keeping the bird warm. This one is for flight. This one also helps in flight because the tail helps to control steering. And you have the contour feathers, right? This and this one, they're almost in the same group. So actually the 4 main groups are going to be these 2 are one group. There's another group, this 2 another group, and this one another group. You will notice, or you might have noticed, when you are removing feathers from a chicken before you prepare it, after you remove the big feathers, then you come across these ones, which sometimes are mixed with some of these big feathers, and below it you have these ones that look more or less like hairs. And but then what sometimes people don't easily see, except experienced people, what they do is to get rid of these ones, the bristle and the phyllopium, they have to pass the chicken over some fire that will burn them, because it's very difficult to see them and then remove them. They can be seen, but like to be able to see all of them and remove them, it might take you some time. So being able to fly has enabled the birds to have some advantages. They're able to travel long distances within a very short time. If you travel on land, for example, you have to go across every obstacle. If there are hills, you have to climb. If there are water, you have to cross them, and this and that. But if you're flying, you're taking the shortest route, you're up, and that's why they're able to travel very long distances. And that makes them to use less energy compared to their colleagues that have to walk like us. If you have to walk, you're going through a lot of things, so you use much, much more energy. But if you're flying, and with them, they are so adapted It's not like they are flapping their wings all the time. They've so learned to adjust themselves with the air current that it becomes easier. Most of the time, in fact, they're just adjusting their feathers. If you watch the vultures, for example, or those birds that are high up in the air, you only see them gliding. You know, they're using the air to their advantage. So they use very little air, especially those that have to travel very long distances. So as I mentioned before, they're able to cross barriers like streams, lakes, oceans, mountains, and so on, that other animals must cross. You know, if you have to pass from one place to the other, you actually have to go. If there is a mountain or if there is a stream there, you have to cross it. But for the birds, they just fly over it. And because of that, it's very easy for them to escape predators. And of course, with flying, you can easily, you know, jump and you're up in the air. The predator might be down there. They might find it difficult to reach you. Feeding is something you've probably seen the chicken and others do. But let us understand that with the birds, they can feed on almost anything. There are those that are carnivorous. There are those that are herbivores. That is, they feed only on grains. But largely, birds mix the food. So a lot of them are omnivores, meaning they feed on plants and animal products. Okay, so it depends on the type of bird. Some feed on fruits, grains, small insects, worms. But the larger ones, most of them are carnivores. They feed mostly by capturing other animals which they feed on. Their beaks, depending on what they feed on, are specialized for capturing prey and also for, of course, being able to keep the prey and then sometimes, you know, smash them into pieces. Again, remember, birds don't have teeth, so they can only swallow. So either they swallow the organism whole, or they, you know, just hold them and be flinging or bashing them on some rock or tree nearby, and the organism will break into pieces, and then they can swallow those pieces. Or sometimes some would use the claws on their feet to hold the prey while they hold, you know, certain mouthful pieces and tear the animal apart, and then they can swallow that. So we've already mentioned that a part of the stomach, which is the gizzard, it helps to grind the food into smaller pieces. They often help to bring in some sand into the gizzard so that digesting these pieces of food will be much easier. Again, reproduction in this organism is something we're familiar with. You might have seen chickens, you know, chasing each other. One will jump on top of the other, and the males usually are the ones that will jump on top of the female, and they have the cloaca. So they bring their cloacas together, and sperm from the male is deposited into the female. It will fertilize the eggs internally, okay? And during which time the egg is fertilized inside the female. And so like the reptiles, we said they also have a cloaca. It's just a single opening for the exit of sperms, feces, and of course urine, and any other waste. So the male brings his sperm to the female cloaca, then the hard-shelled egg develops within the female. So for birds, the shell of the eggs are hard because of the calcium there. So we describe them as being calcareous. So why these organisms are important? As I mentioned before, if you look at the importance of fish, the importance of the toad, the importance of the lizard, and now the importance of the bird, you'll see a lot of similarities. Most important, one thing that is common to all of them is the fact that they are all part of the food chain. So either they are eating or they eat others. So they help to maintain the food chain. Okay, that's very important. But apart from that, we want to look for the birds. We want to look at why they are important to us human beings, the importance of birds to humans. So bird meat and eggs are a major source of food. Protein, they provide rich protein. We all know this. We eat eggs, we eat chicken, a lot of chicken. So that is one very importance of birds. They are also grown for the meat, the feathers, and the eggs, and other products. Now, these products are sold to bring in income for those engaged in it, and also those middle people that buy and sell these products. So they are a major source of income. Different varieties of the wild birds also bring in bird watchers, okay? And this promotes tourism revenue, and of course, it provides employment for those working in those tourism areas. So people go around, they want to see different varieties. Abuko is a typical example. You have tourists coming from different areas. They want to see the different varieties that Gambia is providing. And they don't just stop at Abuko. They go to other areas wherein they are sure to see more interesting varieties of birds. Birds are very important in pollination of plants because the plants provide them with seeds and some other attractive, nourishment like the nectar in the flowers. So birds go after those things, and in the process, they help to pollinate plants. Now, birds are very important in controlling pests and rodents by hunting them down and eating them. Like I mentioned, they're very important in the food chain. And also, this is good for farmers or even people having few of them in the compound. If you have lots of cockroaches, just bring your chicken. They will help you to reduce their population or any other pests that are disturbing you. Some are grown as pets in some societies, or some people enjoy having some of these birds. Like pigeon is a very common pet you find in a lot of homes. People just enjoy having them, enjoying their lifestyle, looking at them, see how they go about things. They provide manure, okay? The bird dropping, people who have, people who are growing chicken, the droppings that come from these birds, they're very rich in manure. So if you put them in your garden or in your flowers, where you're growing flowers, you'll see those crops will be doing very well. And the birds that eat fruit or other seeds, they help in what is known as dispersal. That's something we might be talking about later. Dispersal is spreading the seeds of plants away from the parent plant. Now remember, that helps to reduce competition for sunlight, resources from the soil like water and minerals, and so birds help in spreading out the plants. And also in the process, apart from reducing the competition, but they are also taking these plants to different environments. Plants don't move from place to place. So when their seeds are taken to new environments, that increases their chance of survival. So next we want to look at the mammals. So I'll be brief with these ones because the descriptions we've given for the others are more or less the same. There are just minor differences here. So here is a typical mammal we're familiar with. So for looking at their general characteristics, examples include rats, dogs, and humans. Okay, I remember I mentioned the class is Mammalia. Of course, they are vertebrates. Now, some mammals live on land, like us, and others live in water. We know they produce the young alive. Fertilization is internal. We've explained that. They possess mammary gland, and that is very important. In fact, mammals got their name because of the mammary gland, which is found in the females anyway. And it functions in producing milk that is necessary to feed the young ones. For mammals, the bodies are covered with hairs, and these hairs provide insulation. In others, it's very useful for camouflage, right? So that they can blend in their environment and will be difficult to be seen. That way they are protected. And for others, it's for display. When you have very beautiful colors of the skin, I mean, this time we're talking about the hair on the skin, it makes the animal attractive. And so especially for courtship among the animals, courtship is when the males are trying to attract females, and in some instances the females also may be attracting the males so that they can reproduce. So the better you are at attracting females or the opposite sex, the better your chances of having your offspring. And we said they possess 2 pairs of limbs like all the other organisms we've mentioned. They breathe by means of lungs, and for them the lungs are much more efficient in gas exchange. So that has make it easier and helpful for them to gain a lot of energy for a lot of activities. They are the only group that possess the external earlobes. You'll find out in all the other organisms, we only mention the eardrum. The toad, the lizard, the bird, they all have eardrum, but they don't have the external ear. And so the external ear helps to capture and direct sound into the eardrums. They are homeothermic. We explained that means they are able to keep a constant body temperature. And they possess a diaphragm. It's a sheet of muscle that separates the thorax from the abdomen, and it's also very helpful in helping the organisms for breathing, because when it is lowered, it increases the chest cavity, and that causes pressure to be lowered inside the chest, and air outside with a higher pressure will push the air into the organism's body. They have a fully functioning heart with 4 chambers. They possess inner ear that contains 3 bones for improving, the sound, the vibrations. So you'll find out in mammals, hearing is much more improved. They possess a very large brain, and that helps them to learn. And thus, the parental care is extended so that they are able to take care of the young, teach them better skills of survival, and hence you will see that the rate at which mammals survive is much more higher than the rate at which other organisms in the animal group survive. More on that, there are many species of mammals that have developed varying adaptations to different environments in which they live. They could be both behavioral and structural mechanisms. This is to help them survive in extreme conditions in desert and in very cold places. So those in cold places have a thick layer of fat or fur in order to keep themselves warm. Others go into hibernation. That means they go into some place. Sometimes they will dig a hole, or sometimes they'll go into a hole that is already existing, like in a cave, and they stay there. They reduce their activities. Even breathing is reduced to a much lower rate, so they don't need to be. They don't spend a lot of energy or food. Usually, this happens when food is scarce. In some areas, when the place is very cold, there is a lot of snow and ice, there will be almost no food. So animals that live in those areas go into a condition or a state that is described as hibernation. In that condition, they're not moving, mostly they're lying there sleeping, and they reduce anything that is using a lot of energy, like respiration is reduced to a lower rate, breathing and all other things. Others that dwell in the deserts or other warm climates, they also have devised a mechanism to make sure they survive. In this case, their kidneys and sweat glands, minimize the loss of water. Unlike others that live where there's abundance of water, they can, be urinating a lot. But the ones that live in desert, because the availability of water is almost non-existent, they only get water from the food or animals they eat. So what they do is to make sure they don't lose a lot of water. So the waste they pass out is a highly concentrated waste. Almost all the water is retained in their body. Others are nocturnal. That means they come out only at night when the temperature is lower, because during the day the temperatures might be very, very high. And for others, what they do, what they've employed is or deployed is to make sure at dawn and at dusk, that's the time they come out and feed. And by the time the sun is coming out, they've gone into hiding away from the extreme desert heat. These should be areas. Some migrate from one region to another in order to escape very harsh conditions. Now, you might have heard or might have seen some of these birds that migrate from Europe, and they come all the way to Africa, because here it's almost always hot. So in Europe, or some parts of Europe, at certain times, it's so cold that it's very difficult for them to survive. So they will move, thousands of kilometers, and they come all the way to Africa. So, importance of mammals to man. Again, like I mentioned, if you look at the importance of all the other organisms, you'll see the importance are all similar, okay? Number one is the ecological balance that is maintained by mammals, okay? They feed on other organisms, and likewise others feed on them. And that keeps the food chain going. If they were not there, it means some other part of the food chain is going to be disturbed, because either one area will be growing, and those that need to feed, maybe they can't feed directly on this one, so they will be starving. But the mammals are in between, those that they feed on, and then the others that they depend on. They are used in research and study. That means we use mammals like rodents, rats, to do a lot of studies, because our body organs and theirs are similar. It's just the size that is different. So sometimes even to do tests on certain drugs, they will use these small mammals. They provide employment and income, like we've said before. Those engaged in farming, cattle, goat, sheep, and so on. It creates a lot of employment for those people and brings in a lot of income. And all the middle people that are engaged in buying and selling, they also make a lot of money. And in some countries, they depend mostly on growing mammals. That brings in huge income for the countries. And some are kept as pets. People find a lot of comfort with keeping mammals like dogs, cats, and so on. And there are other interesting mammals that people keep as pets, so that they can have quality time with them. So that takes us to water plants. And here we're going to be brief, because we'll be just generalizing the characteristics of water plants and how they are adapted. So water lily, lotus, duckweed, these are examples of water plants. Now, among the chief characteristics, one is they have a very thin cuticle. The cuticle has the function of preventing loss of water on the leaf. It's like a very thin skin that can be found on the leaf. So for animals, plants that live on land, the mango, the oranges, and the neem, and so on, they have very thick cuticles. That way they're able to reduce water loss, because they don't have the luxury of getting water all the time. But water plants, water is not a problem, so hence their cuticle is only there to protect maybe some other substances from being lost, but not water, because they are in abundance of water. The stomata, all right, for them the stomata they are open all the time. For those that live on land, they can't afford to open the stomata all the time, because when the stomata is open, they lose water. But with the water plants, they are in water, so there's no danger of losing water. So the stomata can be open all the time, and that means that the guard cells on the stomata are not active. They don't do a lot of work. It's like a door. If you need to be opening and closing the door, then you need somebody to take care of the gate or the door. But if there is no concern about the door being open or closed, so there is no need to keep a watchman there. So for them, the guard cells, no use. because the stomata are open all the time, and with the stomata being open all the time means they're able to get a lot of carbon dioxide so that they can carry on with their photosynthesis. Also, the stomata, they have an increased number of stomata. What is the benefit of this? It means they have the chance to do more photosynthesis, but unfortunately this is only on one side of the leaf. That is the upper side, because the bottom side is lying on the water. So if you have stomata on the underside, which is not exposed to sunlight, it will be of, which cannot easily allow the gas to escape, because whatever, if it is open to the water will be blocking the stomata. So they have all their stomata on the upper surface so that when they are open, materials can pass in and out easily. We continue to look at the characteristics of our water plants. We say they have a less rigid structure. This is so because they are already being supported by the pressure of the water. Water pressure supports them. Unlike land plants that need to carry themselves, they need to support themselves. So as a result of that, land plants need to have very tough stems. Well, water plants have soft stems because the stems don't function in carrying the plants. They're just there to coordinate the roots and the rest of the plant. Also, to help them float, they have air sacs. These are traps, little membranes with air trapped in them. They help to keep the plant afloat. They have very tiny roots. They don't need the rigid, bigger roots of other plants like the land plants that need to go deeper into the soil and search for water. They live in the water, so there is abundance of water. So also what helps them is the fact that water can simply diffuse directly into the leaves and other parts of the plant, so large root systems are not needed for water uptake. And the roots are tiny roots, feather-like roots, feathery roots. There's no need for them to support the plant. They are there only to absorb minerals in the water. Now sometimes, because there is a large amount of water, that it means the minerals are scattered in the water, so it's not easy to actually absorb these minerals like land plants, wherein there is little water and hence the mineral content will be highly concentrated. But here there is a dilute situation, so they have these feathery roots that are very good at absorbing the minerals, but they have no business in supporting the plant, because like I said up here, the plant is supported by the water. Now they have long roots so that the roots will be able to go to far distances. Again, it's not to absorb water. They already have water, which even the leaves can absorb, but the roots need to be long so that they can be able to reach the bottom of the soil and absorb minerals. And they have very thin leaves that helps to provide a greater surface area for the absorption of mineral solutes and also for absorption of air, in particular oxygen. The submerged plants, because you have some that are below the water, they lack the external protective tissue that is required by land plants to limit water loss. They have no cuticle. Now remember, we said the cuticle is the thin membrane on the surface of leaves, especially those for the land plants, because there's the risk of them losing too much water. So having a cuticle will help prevent that. When you come to the water plants, there's no need to prevent loss of water. The water is in abundance, so they can just continue to lose the water, and hence they are, those that are below the water don't need any protection against loss of water. Let's briefly look at how water lily in particular is adapted to life under water. First we start with the leaves. Their leaves are broad, very large leaves, as you can see in the picture. Now that helps to distribute the weight of the plant over the water. It helps them to float easy. Their leaves tend to be broader and they remain flat on the water surface, and so large surface area is provided for absorption or exchange of gases, and also to expose them to as much sunlight as possible. The stomata and the chloroplasts, they are found on the top of their leaves, enabling them to absorb gases from the air and carry out photosynthesis. Compared to land plants, now the top of the leaves is where you find the chloroplast, the bottom is where you have the stomata, so that these two activities, absorption of gases and absorption of sunlight, are not disturbed. But with water plants, because the bottom or the undersurface is in contact with the water, they cannot absorb gases there, and they cannot, of course, be able to get sunlight from there. So it's only the top. And because the leaves are very broad, very wide, so there is more than enough space for absorption of sunlight for photosynthesis, and of course enough space for exchange of gases. And they produce flowers above the water surface. They are in the water, but then they make sure the flowers are above the water surface. That way, insects will be able to reach them. If the flowers were produced under the water, it's only organisms that are in the water that will go there and help. And there will be a lot of interference with the activities of pollination in this case. The seeds of fruits that they produce are able to float freely. Again, that helps in their dispersal, their distribution. We earlier on talked about the importance of seeds being distributed. If all the seeds were to be produced and they drop around the parent plant, there's going to be a lot of competition for resources, sunlight, minerals, and other things. So this is why they are adapted by producing their seeds and fruit that can float, so that they can be easily distributed or dispersed. So here is a diagram of the water lily. As we're saying, the leaves, you can see the large leaves that are floating, they help to keep the plant up, and so that they don't need any good root. In fact, this you're looking at is not the root, okay? This is the stem, and they have a very weak stem because they don't need any support. And then the roots, which are sort of embedded in the mud, they're simply there to help absorb nutrient. In some instances, actually, it is the leaf petiole that is extending all the way down, and they usually have a very short stem at the base there, which is there just to store food and not to support the plant. So those are some of the characteristics and adaptation of water plants. Once again, let me thank you for having the time to sit through my lesson. My name is Mr. Quraish. Thank you very much.